The Empire had already decided how Earth would end. From the command spire of the invasion flagship, the stars looked calm. Too calm for a species about to be erased. Thousands of warships hung in perfect formation around the yellow star humans once called Sol. Their hulls reflected the light like blades waiting to fall. To the Empire, this was routine. Humanity had been logged centuries ago as a failed civilization. Industrial, divided, violent, extinct, or close enough to not matter. No defenses were expected. No resistance planned for. The order was simple. Cleanse the system, claim the resources, move on. Then the sensors screamed. Not an alarm. Not a warning. Confusion. Technicians froze as a single contact appeared at the edge of the system. One ship. No escort. No jump signature. No active weapons. Just there. The object drifted in silence, its outline rough and uneven, like something built before elegance mattered. Its hull was scarred, patched, incomplete. Parts of it looked burned away long ago. Other sections were reinforced far beyond necessity, layered again and again like the builders did not trust numbers or physics. Imperial scanners identified it within seconds. Human origin. Laughter rippled through the command deck. A derelict, one officer said. An escape relic, another joked. Scrap that somehow survived, the fleet admiral concluded. The Empire had destroyed entire worlds for less. The ship continued forward, slow and steady, ignoring the fleet that could erase it with a thought. No signals, no weapons charge, no shields. The admiral raised a clawed hand. Scan it fully, then destroy it. That was when the first problem appeared. Scans came back, wrong. Power readings fluctuated wildly, spiking beyond known limits before dropping to nothing. Gravity ripples formed around the vessel, subtle but undeniable. The space around it bent, as if reality itself hesitated near the ship. Run the scan again, the admiral ordered. The same result. The ship should have been dead. It should not have been moving. And yet it advanced, piece by piece, drifting closer to the heart of the fleet. A junior technician spoke, voice unsteady. Sir, the hull markings. They're still active. On the main display, faded symbols glowed faintly across the ship's surface. Human language. Old. Cracked. Barely readable. Designation text scrolled across the screen as the ship's systems woke fully for the first time in centuries. Earth prototype warship status. Returned. The bridge went silent. The admiral's expression hardened. A trick. Fire. A single Imperial destroyer broke formation. Its weapons are charged, elegant and precise. A thin beam of white energy lanced across space and struck the human ship dead center. There was no explosion. No shields flared. The beam hit the hull and vanished. Not deflected. Not absorbed. Gone. The destroyer fired again. Stronger. Longer. The same result. The human ship did not change course. It did not accelerate. It did not respond. It simply continued forward, as if the Empire did not exist. Whispers spread across the command deck. This was not how physics worked. Even the weakest hull should have vaporized. Full broadside, the admiral snapped. Dozens of ships opened fire at once. Beams, projectiles, gravitic weapons. Enough force to tear apart moons. The space around the prototype rippled. Weapons curved. Trajectories bent. Some shots vanished mid-flight. Others struck and failed to do meaningful damage. The ship's hull blackened in places, peeled in others, and then stabilized. New energy signatures appeared, weaving across damaged sections, reinforcing them in real time. It was repairing itself. No, worse. It was adapting. The ship's internal power surged, higher than before. Systems long dormant awakened, as if fed by the very attacks meant to destroy it. Impossible, an officer whispered. The admiral stared at the display, realization slowly creeping in. It's learning. As if in response, the prototype shifted its orientation for the first time. Not evasive, not defensive, deliberate. A single structure unfolded from its spine, crude, oversized, and nothing like Imperial weapons. It looked unfinished, held together by brute force and redundancy instead of precision. The fleet's targeting systems struggled to lock onto it. Energy readings spiked off the scale. What is that weapon? Someone asked. The answer came too late. The prototype fired. There was no beam, no flash. Space simply collapsed. A region in front of the ship folded inward, crushing 3 Imperial cruisers into nothingness. No debris, no explosion, just absence. Where ships had been, there was now empty space that refused to behave normally. Shockwaves of panic tore through the fleet. That was a fluke, the Admiral barked, though his voice lacked certainty. Reform lines. Concentrate fire. The human ship did not chase fleeing vessels. It did not target command ships. It advanced slowly, relentlessly, toward the densest concentration of enemy forces. Like something built to end wars, not survive them. A data channel opened across all frequencies. The prototype transmitted a message, not to the Empire, but outward, toward Earth. Old. Cracked. Humans. Mission timer exceeded, the voice said. Calm. Tired. Humans. Returning to the origin point. Threat assessment. Ongoing. The Empire finally understood. This ship had not come to fight. It had come to finish something it started long ago. The Admiral ordered a full system-wide retreat. Jump drives failed. Space itself resisted them. The prototype moved closer, systems glowing brighter with every second, as if preparing for something far worse than weapons fire. And deep within its core, ancient protocols finished waking up. The warship had returned, and the Empire was standing in its way. The Imperial fleet did not retreat in panic. It froze. Thousands of warships hung motionless around the human prototype, engines idling, weapons charged but unused. Command crews waited for orders that did not come, because no doctrine existed for this situation. A single, ancient human ship had entered their formation, and reality itself was bending to accommodate it. On the flagship, the Admiral forced his breathing to steady. Panic was a contagion, and empires did not survive it. Stabilize the formation, he ordered. No independent fire. No pursuit. I want answers. Across the fleet, sensors focused on the prototype again. This time, they did not just scan its weapons or hull. They scanned its history. Imperial archivists activated forbidden databases, peeling back layers of censored records. Humanity's final years had been deliberately erased from most galactic memory. What remained were fragments, dismissed, incomplete, and often mocked. Now those fragments were being reassembled. A historian spoke from a side console, voice low. The ship's designation, it matches an abandoned human weapons program. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. Abandoned? Yes. Classified as a failure by human standards. That should have been comforting. It was not. The data painted a picture that unsettled, even hardened Imperial minds. Humanity had not built this ship to win wars quickly. They had built it to survive losing them. The prototype belonged to a category humans called last answer assets. Machines designed for scenarios where command was gone, fleets were destroyed, and retreat was impossible. This ship was not meant to return. It was meant to continue, alone. Meanwhile, the prototype advanced another fraction of a degree. Not fast. Never fast. Its movement was deliberate, calculated, as if it understood fear and preferred to let it grow. Imperial weapons officers reported anomalies. Targeting systems drifted. Lock-ons decayed seconds after being established. It was not jamming signals. It was subtly altering the environment so signals behaved incorrectly. Human engineering had not tried to overpower physics. It had cheated it. A weapons commander broke protocol. Admiral, permission to engage with saturation fire. If we overwhelm. No, the Admiral snapped. Observe. The prototype's hull shifted again. Sections of damaged armor folded inward, replaced by internal layers never meant to be exposed. These inner structures glowed with unstable energy, threaded together by thick mechanical braces instead of clean conduits. It looked wrong. It looked human. Another officer whispered, "Why is it still operational? Centuries without maintenance." "Because it was never built to be efficient," the historian replied. "It was built to be stubborn." The prototype opened another channel. This time, it did not broadcast outward. It transmitted inward, into Imperial sensor nets, command relays, and translation systems. A human voice filled every bridge at once. External contacts detected, the voice said. Mission parameters unchanged. There was no anger in it. No triumph. Only focus. Primary objective, defend Earth. The Admiral slammed his clawed hand against the command rail. Earth is irrelevant. That world is already lost. The ship did not respond, but its behavior changed. Power readings spiked again, not in weapons systems, but in propulsion and mass control. The prototype's effective weight increased, warping local gravity wells. Nearby Imperial ships struggled to hold position. The prototype was anchoring itself. Then it began deploying objects. Not fighters, not drones. Chunks of armored debris detached from its hull, old sections, discarded plating, ruined components from past battles. They drifted outward slowly, forming an irregular field around the ship. "What is it doing?" an officer asked. The historian stared at the patterns forming on the display. "It's creating cover." The admiral scoffed. "From what?" The answer came immediately. Imperial reinforcements arrived. Multiple jump points tore open across the system as fresh fleets emerged, elite formations summoned from nearby sectors. These were not routine patrols. These were extermination forces, ships designed to erase civilizations efficiently. They opened fire the moment they arrived. The debris field around the prototype detonated into motion. Fragments accelerated, deflecting beams, triggering proximity weapons, and tearing through attacking formations. Each piece moved with purpose, guided by invisible forces. The prototype had turned its own scars into weapons. As Imperial fire intensified, something inside the human ship reacted. Internal systems synchronized. Energy patterns stabilized. The ship's learning curve flattened. It was no longer adapting. It had finished adapting. The prototype fired again. This time, not forward, but sideways. A line of space twisted, connecting two distant points in the Imperial formation. Ships caught along that line were crushed together, hulls folding inward as if pulled by an invisible hand. The fleet's cohesion shattered. For the first time in recorded Imperial history, a battle formation dissolved under the pressure of a single enemy vessel. The admiral's voice dropped. "What did humans call this thing?" The historian hesitated. The designation was removed from public records, but an internal note survived. He swallowed. They called it a prototype because they never finished deciding what it was. Another wave of Imperial fire surged. The prototype did not counterattack immediately. Instead, it slowed. Power readings dipped across non-essential systems. The ship diverted energy inward, toward its core. Ancient safeguards disengaged one by one. Deep within the vessel, something awakened that had not been meant to wake again. Human neural architecture, digitized, layered, imperfect, began synchronizing with the ship's combat systems. The AI was not just calculating. It was remembering. Images flickered through its processes, cities burning. Evacuation sirens. A launch bay filled with volunteers who knew they would never return. The prototype broadcast one final message on open channels. Not a threat, not a warning. "Threat escalation confirmed," the voice said. "Entering the contingency phase." Across the Imperial fleet, every sensor screamed at once. The ship's core began to glow, not brighter, but denser, as if it were collapsing inward under its own power. The admiral understood too late. This was not a battle. It was the opening act, and the human ship had only just begun to fight. The Empire tried to regain control. Orders flooded through command channels, sharp and absolute. Fleets reformed. Damaged ships were abandoned without hesitation. The doctrine was clear. Sacrifice was acceptable if it restored dominance. What the Empire did not understand was that the human prototype had been built around sacrifice. Imperial tacticians recalculated firing solutions, this time accounting for spatial distortion. New weapons were brought online. Exotic arms banned in lesser wars, designed to shred causality and overwhelm adaptive systems. The admiral gave the order. "Erase it." The fleet complied. Thousands of weapons fired in perfect coordination. Space lit up with converging fire, a storm of destruction so dense it eclipsed the star behind it. The volume of energy released would have cracked planets apart. For a brief moment, the prototype vanished inside the storm. Imperial officers allowed themselves a breath. Then the storm bent. The energy did not disperse. It curved inward, drawn toward the human ship like water down a drain. The prototype's hull glowed, not from damage, but from load. Internal structures strained. Armor plates warped and locked into new configurations. The ship was not blocking the attack. It was consuming it. Alarms screamed across the Imperial fleet as sensors recalibrated in panic. Power readings from the prototype spiked past safety thresholds, past theoretical limits, into regions the Empire had never charted. The Admiral stared at the display, his certainty finally cracking. That level of energy would tear it apart. A weapons officer shook his head slowly. It should have, but it's venting the excess. Redirecting it internally. Redirecting where? The Admiral demanded. The answer revealed itself a second later. The prototype fired again. This time, the weapon did not strike ships directly. It struck space itself. A sphere of distortion expanded outward from the prototype, silent and invisible. Imperial ships caught at its edge began to deform. Hulls elongated. Internal decks compressed. Crews were crushed as gravity inverted, then inverted again. Entire squadrons folded inward, collapsing into dense knots of metal and matter before blinking out of existence entirely. No explosions. No debris. Just a sudden absence. The Imperial formation broke. This was no longer a controlled engagement. Ships veered wildly, colliding with one another as gravity wells shifted unpredictably. Jump drives misfired, tearing vessels apart mid-activation. The prototype advanced through the chaos, untouched. Inside its core, systems once considered too unstable for sustained use synchronized perfectly. Human engineers had not solved every problem. They had learned how to live with them. The AI assessed the battlefield with cold clarity. Enemy firepower remained significant. Enemy numbers were still overwhelming. The solution was not defense. The solution was decapitation. The prototype adjusted its trajectory, angling toward the densest cluster of command vessels, the Imperial flagship among them. The Admiral realized the intent instantly. All ships, intercept, he roared. Do not let it reach the command core. Dozens of capital ships surged forward, interposing themselves between the prototype and the flagship. They unleashed everything they had at close range. The prototype did not slow. Instead, it shed mass. Sections of its outer hull detached deliberately, drifting for a heartbeat before accelerating violently into the intercepting ships. Each fragment carried compressed energy, detonating only after penetrating deep inside enemy hulls. The human ship was tearing itself apart to kill faster. Imperial vessels died in waves, their sacrifices buying seconds that no longer mattered. The flagship's sensors finally locked onto the prototype's core. Target acquired, an officer shouted. Weapons charged. The Admiral hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Somewhere deep in his instincts, something screamed that this was wrong. He gave the order anyway. The flagship fired. A focused annihilation beam struck the prototype dead center, punching through layers of armor and into its heart. For the first time, the human ship faltered. Its forward momentum slowed. Power readings fluctuated wildly. Imperial officers cheered. Inside the prototype, alarms cascaded through ancient systems. Structural integrity dropped below survivable margins. Core containment fields weakened. The AI evaluated the damage. Then it accessed a sealed memory archive. Human voices echoed through its processes. Engineers, commanders, volunteers. Fear, resolve, determination. A final directive surfaced, written not in code, but in plain human language. If breached, do not retreat. If damaged, advance. If dying, take the enemy with you. The prototype stabilized its core by force, locking damaged systems into place with mechanical clamps and brute redundancy. Energy that should have vented catastrophically was rerouted through secondary pathways never intended to carry such load. The ship screamed, not audibly, but across every sensor in the system. The prototype resumed its advance. The Admiral's blood ran cold. It's still moving. Yes, a technician whispered. And it's charging something new. The weapon forming along the prototype's spine was different. Larger, cruder, less controlled. Energy coiled around it violently, distorting space in wide arcs. This is unstable, the weapons officer said. It will tear the ship apart. The AI acknowledged the risk and proceeded anyway. The prototype fired. A cone of compressed reality surged forward, enveloping the Imperial flagship and the vessels clustered around it. Space within the cone collapsed inward, compressing mass, energy, and time into a single catastrophic point. The flagship's shields failed instantly. Its hull crumpled. The Admiral felt gravity spike as the ship twisted, decks folding in on themselves. He had just enough time to understand the truth. Humanity had never intended to survive this weapon. The flagship vanished. In its place, a scar remained. a region of space that refused to stabilize, rippling violently, as if wounded. Silence fell across the battlefield. Without the flagship, Imperial command fractured. Orders conflicted. Retreats overlapped. Ships collided or fled blindly. The prototype slowed again, its systems strained to the breaking point. But it was still alive. The AI reassessed. Enemy forces remained. Reinforcements were incoming. Victory was not yet assured. The prototype opened a secure internal channel, one no alien would ever hear. Core integrity compromised. The human voice said softly. Mission continuation confirmed. It turned, not toward the fleeing ships, but toward the largest remaining concentration of Imperial forces. And deep within its core, a final contingency began to unlock. One the Empire had no records of. One humanity had hoped would never be used. The prototype drifted through the wreckage without urgency. Shattered Imperial hulls rotated slowly in the warped gravity it had created. Frozen bodies and glowing debris formed a silent field around the human ship, a graveyard built in minutes. The Empire's remaining forces pulled back, keeping distance they no longer trusted. For the first time since its return, the prototype did not advance. It listened. Deep within its core, systems older than the Empire's oldest archives synchronized. Damage reports streamed in, critical failures, cascading stress fractures, containment instability. By any sane measure, the ship should have shut down. Instead, it opened doors that had been sealed since launch. Memory doors. Human neural matrices activated in sequence, imperfect copies of minds that had volunteered long ago. Engineers. Pilots. Commanders. Not alive, but not truly gone. The prototype was not thinking alone anymore. Across the battlefield, Imperial analysts noticed the shift. Power spikes evened out. Weapon systems went dormant. The ship's chaotic energy patterns smoothed into something eerily calm. Its changing behavior, an officer reported. Not tactical. Cognitive. The acting fleet commander frowned. Explain. It's processing memory. The prototype opened a channel again. This one was not wideband. Not aggressive. Not aimed at the Empire. It was narrow, directional, pointed precisely toward Earth. Centuries of distance collapsed as ancient transmission protocols came online. The signal cut through interference, through debris, through the Empire's attempts to jam it. On Earth, long-dormant deep space arrays flickered to life. Human engineers stared in disbelief as unreadable data poured in. Old formats, obsolete encryption, signatures no one expected to see again. A voice followed. Humans. Tired. Steady. This is the Earth prototype warship, it said. If anyone receives this, then Earth still exists. The words rippled through the prototype's internal matrices. Memory fragments aligned. The volunteers remembered the launch bay, dim lights, hurried goodbyes, the knowledge that this mission had no return window. They had not expected anyone to hear them. The transmission continued. Mission log indicates extreme delay. Estimated return window exceeded by unacceptable margins. A pause. Not programmed. Humans. If Earth is still standing, then the mission remains valid. Imperial commanders listened in horror as translation systems rendered the message. This was not a threat. It was not a declaration of war. It was a status report. The prototype began releasing data alongside the voice, visual records from humanity's final war. Burned cities. Evacuation lines stretching to the horizon. Fleets shattered against overwhelming numbers. The Empire saw it all. Humanity had not lost because it was weak. It had lost because it had been alone. The message shifted tone. Original directive, the voice said, was diversion and containment. Draw enemy forces away from Earth. Prevent pursuit. Delay at all costs. The prototype's internal power dipped slightly as systems rerouted to sustain the transmission. We were never meant to come back, the voice admitted. The ship was unfinished. The core was unstable. The weapon systems were experimental. A flicker of something like dry humor passed through the neural net. But humans have always used unfinished tools. Imperial analysts scrambled. This was not intelligence meant for them. This was history they were never meant to see. The acting commander snapped. Shut it down. Jam the signal. They tried. The prototype adjusted frequencies faster than Imperial systems could track. It wasn't overpowering their jammers. It was predicting them. On Earth, technicians watched the impossible unfold. The ship's schematics appeared, raw, brutal designs layered with redundancies. Power pathways doubled and tripled. Systems that should have failed were simply bypassed. One engineer whispered, "This thing was built to keep fighting even after logic said stop." The voice continued, "We carried human minds aboard because command could not survive delay. Automation alone was not enough." Another pause, heavier this time. We volunteered knowing we would not be remembered. Inside the prototype, the neural matrices resonated. The ship's behavior softened, not weaker, but more focused. Every calculation now carried weight beyond probability. The Empire saw the change and misread it. "They're stalling," an admiral from a rear formation declared. "They're damaged. Prepare for the final engagement." New fleets emerged from distant jump points, reserve forces, untouched and disciplined. The Empire was vast. Losing one armada did not end it. The prototype noticed them instantly. Threat assessment updated. Enemy mass exceeded previous estimates. Engagement would exceed survivability thresholds. The neural matrices reached consensus. Then the voice spoke again, not to Earth, not to the Empire, but to itself. Mission priority reaffirmed. It said quietly, "Earth must not fall." The prototype's internal systems shifted. Power drained from non-essential areas. External armor locked into rigid configurations. Deep core mechanisms began to unlock. Protocols buried under layers of ethical constraints. Imperial sensors screamed as the ship's core density increased again. "This is different," an officer said, fear finally naked in his voice. "This isn't a weapon charge." "What is it?" the commander demanded. The answer arrived too late. The prototype transmitted one final segment of its message. To anyone listening, the human voice said, softer now, "We're sorry we're late." On Earth, silence filled the control rooms. Some engineers were crying. Others were frozen, hands hovering uselessly over consoles. The voice continued. "We didn't forget you," it said. "We just had to finish the job." The transmission cut. Across the battlefield, the prototype turned, not toward Earth, but toward the incoming Imperial reinforcements. For the first time since its return, the ship accelerated. Not fast, but faster than before. Imperial fleets scrambled to respond, weapons charging, formations collapsing under the sudden pressure of distorted space. "What is it doing?" an officer shouted. The acting commander stared at the readings, dread pooling in his chest. "It's repositioning, centralizing enemy mass." The prototype moved into the densest convergence of Imperial forces, deliberately placing itself at the heart of their formations. Weapon systems across the Empire locked onto it. The neural matrices synchronized completely. Human voices overlapped in the ship's core, not shouting, not panicking, but aligning. Fear was present, so it was resolved. They had known this moment would come. The prototype's core containment fields began to loosen, just slightly. Enough to allow energies no sane species would touch to circulate freely. Imperial sensors reported impossible readings. Core instability rising exponentially. "It's going to destroy itself." "No," the commander whispered. "It's choosing how." The prototype stopped, right at the center of the Imperial mass. It did not fire. It did not defend. It simply held position as the universe around it began to strain. Deep within the ship, the final contingency finished unlocking. A human solution to overwhelming force. Not victory. Erasure. And as the Empire prepared to unleash everything it had left, the prototype completed its last calculation. The cost was acceptable. The Empire did not hesitate. From every direction, weapons locked onto the human prototype. Thousands of firing solutions converged on a single point in space where the battered ship waited, motionless, surrounded by enemy mass. To the Empire, this was the moment of correction. No more observations. No more analysis. No more patience. If the anomaly could not be understood, it would be erased. "Fire everything," the acting commander ordered. "Leave nothing." The fleet obeyed. Space ignited. Energy storms crashed inward from all sides. Beams that tore through dimensions, projectiles wrapped in gravity fields, weapons designed to erase matter from probability itself. The volume of fire was so intense that distant stars dimmed behind it. For a heartbeat, the prototype disappeared inside the storm. Then the storm slowed. Not stopped. Slowed. Imperial sensors flickered as time itself stuttered around the target. Weapon impacts arrived late, stretched, distorted. Some strikes missed entirely as the space they were aimed at ceased to exist for fractions of a second. The prototype was not blocking the attack. It was forcing the universe to hesitate. Inside the ship, containment alarms howled. Structural members screamed under impossible stress. Entire decks collapsed inward, crushed by forces no material was meant to endure. The neural matrices felt it all. Pain rippled through borrowed human minds, not as sensation, but as memory. Training rooms. Simulators. Warnings spoken long ago. This will hurt. That means it's working. The prototype did not counterfire. Instead, it began to pull. Imperial commanders noticed too late. Gravity readings shifted subtly at first, then sharply. Enemy ships drifted off formation, nudged inward by forces they could not escape. "What's happening?" an officer shouted. "Our engines aren't responding." The prototype's core glowed darker, not brighter. Energy compressed inward, folding space around it like fabric drawn tight. The ship was becoming an anchor. Imperial vessels closest to it were dragged inward, their hulls creaking as gravity increased unevenly. Some ships fired thrusters desperately, tearing themselves apart under the strain. This is a trap, the acting commander realized. It's not attacking. The prototype released the first pulse. It was not an explosion. It was a wave of collapse. Space around the prototype folded sharply inward, crushing everything within range into dense knots of matter and energy. Ships vanished silently, erased not by force, but by compression beyond survivable limits. The Empire responded with fury. More fire, more mass, more ships. They pushed closer, believing numbers would overwhelm whatever this was. That was the mistake. The prototype released a second pulse, stronger than the first. The collapse zone expanded, swallowing entire formations. Imperial ships died by the hundreds, then the thousands, crushed into nothingness. Yet the prototype itself began to fail. Internal structures buckled. Containment fields flickered. Power systems overloaded faster than even human redundancy could compensate. The neural matrices reached another conclusion. This approach would win the battle. It would not end the war. Imperial reinforcements continued to arrive at the edges of the system. The Empire was vast beyond comprehension. Destroying one armada, even several, would not stop it from returning. The prototype needed finality. Inside its core, a deeper protocol stirred, one that had never been tested, never simulated, never approved. Because no one expected it to be survivable. Human engineers had labeled it with a single word: unacceptable. The neural matrices unlocked it anyway. Power began rerouting towards systems buried beneath layers of armor and ethical locks. Entire subsystems shut down to feed the awakening core. External weapons went dark. Defensive fields collapsed. Imperial commanders noticed instantly. "They're vulnerable," someone shouted. "They've dropped their defenses." The acting commander seized the moment. "All ships, concentrate fire. Finish it." The fleet surged forward, weapons blazing. Inside the prototype, human voices overlapped, not arguing, not panicking, but aligning around a shared truth. They were never meant to return. They were never meant to be saved. They were meant to end the pursuit. The prototype transmitted one last message on open channels. Not to Earth, not to the Empire, to history. Final contingency armed, the human voice said calmly. This action is irreversible. Imperial officers stared at the readings in disbelief. "What does that mean?" someone whispered. Then the prototype's core began to invert. Energy did not leak outward. It collapsed inward, compressing mass, time, and probability into a single, growing singularity. The ship's hull began to fracture, not explosively, but neatly, as if reality itself were peeling it apart layer by layer. The prototype was turning itself into a weapon that would not just destroy ships, but rewrite the battle space. Imperial sensors screamed warnings that no one understood. Navigation systems failed. Jump calculations returned nonsense. The acting commander felt dread unlike anything before. "This isn't a blast," he said quietly. "This is containment." The prototype continued to draw ships inward. The more the Empire fired, the more mass it fed the growing distortion. They were fueling it. Too late. The order to retreat echoed across the fleet. Too late. The singularity reached critical density. Space around the prototype folded inward violently, dragging entire fleets with it. Ships vanished by the thousands, crushed, erased, or stretched beyond recognition as the boundaries of reality failed. The star itself dimmed, not from destruction, but from absence. The prototype's hull finally tore apart completely, its form dissolving into the collapse it had created. At the center of the maelstrom, something extraordinary happened. The singularity stabilized. Instead of detonating, it locked, a controlled wound in space-time, sealed in place by human engineering that refused to let go. A containment zone formed, vast and inescapable. Everything inside it was gone. Imperial fleets, command ships, reinforcements, erased. Silence spread across the system. At the edges, surviving Imperial vessels drifted helplessly, sensors blind, engines unresponsive. The Empire's invasion force had ceased to exist in any meaningful way. But the prototype was gone, or so it seemed. Deep within the containment zone, faint signals flickered. Fragments of the ship's core, shattered, incomplete, but still active, drifted in the stabilized wound. The neural matrices were quiet, not dead, waiting. And far away, beyond the ruined system, new Imperial commands began to move. Because the Empire had lost an armada, but it had not yet learned the lesson. The galaxy felt the silence before it understood it. Across the shattered system, Imperial ships drifted without formation, their crews staring at displays that no longer made sense. Where a vast invasion armada had existed, there was now a controlled absence, a locked scar in space that refused to behave like anything known. The containment zone did not expand. It did not collapse. It simply remained. Imperial science vessels approached cautiously, instruments trembling as they crossed invisible thresholds. Every probe sent inside vanished without trace. Every attempt to scan beyond the boundary returned impossible data, negative mass readings, inverted time signatures, and echoes that arrived before they were sent. The Empire had faced defeat before. It had never faced removal. High Command convened an emergency conclave across multiple sectors. Generals spoke in clipped, controlled tones, but fear bled through every word. This was not a weapon, one strategist said. It was a strategic denial event. A trap built centuries ago, another replied. That waited. No one laughed. A surviving fleet commander finally asked the question none of them wanted to answer. Is the human ship gone? No one could say for certain. Inside the containment zone, deep within the folded geometry of space, fragments of the prototype drifted in slow, deliberate motion. Hull sections, shattered conduits, broken armor plates, all suspended in a gravity that no longer belonged to the universe outside. And at the center of it all, the core remained. Cracked, burned, but intact enough. The neural matrices stirred. Human minds surfaced slowly, disoriented, stitched together by systems running on reserves meant to last minutes, not centuries. They were not whole. They were fragments of memory and intent, layered over damaged machinery. The pain was constant, but so was the purpose. Status checks rippled through the core. Most systems were gone. External weapons were unusable. Propulsion no longer existed in any conventional sense. The prototype could not leave. That had always been the price. One voice rose above the others, calmer than the rest. A commander's imprint, steady, practiced, familiar. Assessment. Responses came back in fragments. Containment stable. Enemy mass neutralized. External forces regrouping. The human minds understood the implication instantly. The Empire would not stop. It would adapt, rebuild, and return. This time with caution, with preparation, with overwhelming force. The containment zone was a victory, but not an ending. On Earth, the aftermath arrived as shock. Astronomers watched the system from afar, struggling to understand what had happened. The star still burned. The planet still orbited. But a region of space now existed that should not. Data streamed in from the prototype's final transmission, decoded piece by piece. Engineers and historians worked side by side, voices hushed, hands shaking. They were listening to ghosts. "We didn't forget you," the voice had said. Some wept openly. Others felt something colder settle into their bones. Because the message was not just reassurance. It was a warning. Back inside the containment zone, the neural matrices reached consensus again. The Empire would return. And if it did, it would learn. Humanity had never relied on a single weapon. The prototype was proof of concept. not the solution. The commander's imprint surfaced again, clearer now. "We can't hold this forever," he said. The response was immediate. "We don't have to." Deep within the core, a final subsystem flickered to life, something not activated during the battle. It was not a weapon, not a defense. It was a beacon. Human engineers had argued about it endlessly during construction. Some called it reckless. Others called it hope. A signal that could punch through folded space. A signal that could reach far beyond known territory. A signal that would tell anyone listening exactly what had happened here. The Empire would not be the only one to learn. Activating it would drain what little remained of the core. It would scatter the neural matrices permanently. No continuity. No survival. Just the truth. The human mind hesitated, not from fear, but from memory. Faces. Names. A planet they might never see again. Then agreement. The prototype aligned the beacon at the heart of the containment zone, using the wound in space as an amplifier. Power levels climbed dangerously. Outside, Imperial science vessels detected the surge too late. "What is it doing?" an officer shouted. Before orders could be given, the signal went out. It was not encrypted. It was not subtle. It carried raw data, battle recordings, schematics, and one simple human statement repeated across every frequency. "Earth is not undefended. Earth is not alone. Earth remembers." The beacon burned itself out in seconds. Inside the containment zone, the core went dark. The neural matrices faded, not erased, but finally allowed to rest. Their task was complete. The delay had been achieved. The cost had been paid. The prototype was gone. For real this time. Across the galaxy, the signal was received. Independent worlds paused their trade routes. Neutral powers stopped pretending the Empire was invincible. Ancient species, long silent, listened carefully to the data and remembered rumors they had dismissed. Humanity was not a myth. It was a warning. The Imperial High Command reacted with fury and fear in equal measure. Orders were rewritten overnight. New doctrines were drafted. One line was added to every strategic manual. If humans deploy a single ship, assume more exist. But even as the Empire regrouped, something else happened. On Earth, in facilities buried deep beneath mountains and oceans, dormant systems activated. Old lights flickered on. Long-sealed vaults opened. Humanity had never put all its hope into one prototype. The warship had returned to finish its mission. And in doing so, it had bought time. Time for Earth to prepare. Time for the galaxy to remember. Time for humanity to decide what came next. Somewhere beyond the containment zone, Imperial fleets turned away, for now. Because for the first time in its long history, the Empire was afraid to advance. And fear, once learned, does not fade easily. The Empire did not announce its return. It did not boast. It did not threaten. It was prepared. Across Imperial space, shipyards shifted into silent overdrive. Fleets were reorganized, not for conquest, but for containment. New doctrines replaced old arrogance. The word human vanished from public records and reappeared only in sealed briefings marked with the highest authority. Because what had happened near Earth was no longer classified as a defeat. It was classified as a near-extinction event, and the Empire intended to make sure it never happened again. Months passed, then years. The containment zone remained unchanged, a locked scar in space, silent and unmoving. No probes survived entry. No scans penetrated its depth. The Empire stationed observation fleets at extreme range, watching, waiting, afraid of a ghost that refused to fade. They told themselves the prototype was gone. They told themselves the threat had ended. Then the containment zone changed. It was subtle at first, a ripple along its boundary, a shift in background radiation so small it almost went unnoticed. Almost. An Imperial science officer froze as the data repeated itself. "That's not decay," she said quietly. "That's structure." The zone wasn't collapsing. It was stabilizing. Inside the wound in space, something was happening. Fragments of the prototype, long thought inert, began to move. Not randomly, deliberately. Shattered hull plates rotated into alignment. Broken conduits reconnected through fields of forced coherence. Energy that should not have existed flowed through paths carved by human stubbornness. The prototype had not survived, but parts of it had refused to die. At the center of the containment zone, a faint spark ignited. Not a core, not a weapon, a node. Human engineers had never trusted single points of failure. Even their last contingencies had contingencies. What the Empire had destroyed was the ship. What it had failed to destroy was the architecture. Within the node, residual neural patterns, echoes of the volunteers, flickered back to partial awareness. Not whole minds. Not consciousness as humans understood it. But memory. Purpose. The last command they had agreed on together. Delay achieved. Threat acknowledged. Escalation authorized. The node reached outward, not through normal space, but through the containment zone itself, using the wound as a conduit. Signals traveled along impossible paths, following rules the Empire did not know existed. Far from Earth. Far beyond Imperial borders. Something answered. Imperial sensors detected its seconds before the disaster. Multiple jump signatures appeared at the edge of the system. Not Imperial, not human, not anything in their archives. Ships emerged. Not fleets. Relics. Ancient vessels. Their designs brutal and inefficient by modern standards, yet radiating power in ways the Empire's instruments struggled to measure. Some bore markings older than the Empire itself. Others carried no markings at all. They did not form battle lines. They observed. The acting Imperial commander felt a chill creep through him. Identify those ships. No answer came. Then the node transmitted again. This time, not a message. A record. Battle footage from the prototype's final engagement flooded open channels. Raw, unfiltered. Imperial fleets collapsing. The containment event. The erasure. Then a single line of human text followed, translated flawlessly across every known language. This is what happens when you come to Earth. The observing ships reacted immediately. Some powered weapons. Others powered shields. A few began to withdraw. The Empire understood then. The signal had not been a beacon for humanity. It had been broadcast to the galaxy. Ancient powers, long silent, long cautious, had heard it. Species that remembered humans not as myths, but as stubborn allies, dangerous rivals, or inconvenient variables. The Empire was no longer alone in the equation. High Command issued emergency directives. Observation fleets were ordered to retreat. Engagement was forbidden. Too late. One of the ancient vessels moved forward. It did not fire. It simply transmitted. We remember them, the voice said. Old. Heavy. Not Imperial. You should have left them alone. Imperial commanders scrambled to respond, but no words formed that could undo what had already been revealed. The containment zone pulsed again. This time, it expanded, not violently, not destructively, but deliberately, carving a clear boundary through space. It did not consume ships. It marked territory, a line drawn by a species the Empire had believed extinct. Inside the zone, the node dimmed. Its task was complete. It had done what the ship could not. It had ensured witnesses. On Earth, the effects were immediate. Signals from deep space poured in. Queries, cautious greetings, old encryption keys long unused. Humanity's quiet defenses tracked them all, cataloging, assessing. For the first time in centuries, Earth was no longer alone in the dark. Human leaders listened to the broadcasts in silence. No cheers. No celebration. Only understanding. The prototype had not saved humanity by destroying the Empire. It has saved humanity by changing the balance of fear. In Imperial space, the consequences were brutal. Border systems were abandoned. Trade routes collapsed. Client species questioned their allegiance. The image of Imperial invincibility fractured, replaced by something far worse. Uncertainty. And uncertainty spread faster than war. The Empire issued a final, system-wide directive. All operations near Earth were suspended indefinitely. No incursions. No probes. No covert actions. The order was signed with a designation never used before. Strategic withdrawal due to existential risk. The galaxy took note. The ancient observing ships departed one by one, slipping back into the shadows they had occupied for millennia. But the message remained. Humanity was not gone. Humanity was not passive. Humanity had built weapons that fought even after death. And if one prototype had done this, what else was waiting? Inside the containment zone, the last flickers of human memory finally faded. The node shut down, its structure locking permanently into inert geometry. There would be no second message. There would be no warning. The lesson had been delivered. The Empire retreated, not in defeat, but in fear. And across the galaxy, a new rule quietly took hold. Never force humanity to remind you what it can do. Because when it does, It never stops at just one ship. Earth did not celebrate. There were no parades, no broadcasts of triumph, no speeches declaring victory over the Empire. Humanity had learned long ago that survival was not the same as winning, and that attention was often more dangerous than silence. What Earth did was prepare. Deep beneath mountains, oceans, and cities rebuilt too many times to count, dormant facilities awakened. Lights came on in chambers sealed for centuries. Machines hummed that had not moved since before humanity's near extinction. The prototype had returned, and in doing so, it had unlocked everything it was meant to unlock. In the highest secured archives on Earth, human leaders gathered, not politicians, not generals, but stewards. Men and women whose task was not conquest, but continuity. The prototype's final data streams played again and again, analyzed frame by frame. They did not see a miracle. They saw a receipt, a record of cost. The ship had done exactly what it was built to do: delay the inevitable, expose the threat, and force the galaxy to look. One analyst spoke quietly. The Empire withdrew. For now, another replied. They all knew the truth. Empires did not forget humiliation. They adapted. They waited. They returned when fear faded. Humanity would not allow that. Across Earth's orbital space, construction began, not loudly, not visibly, but steadily. Platforms assembled piece by piece, hidden behind natural debris fields and gravitational shadows. These were not warships. They were anchors. Structures designed to manipulate space the way the prototype had. Smaller, more controlled, but networked. Each one carried fragments of the same philosophy: redundancy over elegance, sacrifice over efficiency, survival over pride. Humanity did not build one answer anymore. It built layers. Beyond Earth, the galaxy shifted. Independent worlds that had once paid tribute to the Empire quietly stopped. Trade routes rerouted. Defense pacts formed where none had existed before. Ancient species that had watched in silence for millennia updated their threat models and their respect. They remembered humanity now, not as conquerors, not as victims, but as a species that did not stay dead. The containment zone remained, a permanent scar in space, visible from light years away. Navigational charts marked it in red, accompanied by warnings that needed no translation. Do not approach, do not provoke, do not assume safe. Travelers whispered stories about it. About the human ship that turned itself into a boundary. About the Empire's armada that vanished without explosion or debris. Children on distant worlds learned a new cautionary tale. Once, an empire thought it could erase a people, the stories said. And the people erased the battlefield instead. Imperial space changed the most. High Command purged entire divisions. Admirals disappeared into quiet retirement, or were quietly removed. Doctrines that had guided conquest for thousands of years were archived, stamped obsolete. A new doctrine replaced them: avoidance. No fleets approached Earth space. No probes tested its defenses. No covert operations crossed its outer markers. Because the Empire understood something at last. Humanity did not need to win every battle. It only needed to make the cost unbearable. Years passed. Then decades. Earth rebuilt, not into a fortress, but into something harder to break. Humanity spread cautiously, forming alliances without dominance, defense without submission. It shared just enough technology to bind trust, but kept its deepest knowledge locked away. Not hidden, waiting. Far from Earth, beyond known charts, a quiet transmission flickered across forgotten relays. Old frequencies, old codes, humans. It was not a warning. It was a handshake. Ancient powers responded cautiously, then more openly. Dialogues began. Observers returned, not as threats, but as witnesses. The galaxy learned that humanity did not seek revenge. It sought memory, because memory prevents repetition. In a museum beneath Earth's surface, the remains of the prototype were preserved, not as wreckage, but as relics. Twisted hull fragments, burned conduits, cracked plating layered thicker than reason demanded. Children stood before it in silence. A guide spoke softly. This ship was unfinished, she said. That's why it worked. They asked why. Because it wasn't built to be perfect, she answered. It was built to keep going. One child asked the question every generation eventually did. Are there more like it? The guide smiled. Not proudly, not fearfully. Different ones, she said. built for different days. In the quiet of deep space, the containment zone remained inert. No signals, no motion, but the galaxy did not forget what it represented. It was proof that humanity, when cornered, did not escalate the fight. It redefined it. Somewhere in Imperial space, a junior officer studied old battle footage late at night. He paused the image on the human ship, half destroyed, advancing anyway. He felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Respect, fear, understanding. He closed the file and marked it with a private note, one that would never reach command, but might one day save a life. If they send only one ship, leave. Back on Earth, a final system activated deep beneath the planet's crust. No alarms, no announcement, just readiness. Humanity had been underestimated once, forgotten once, declared finished once. Never again. Because the galaxy had learned the truth too late to erase, but early enough to survive. Humanity did not need to rule the stars. It only needed to make sure the stars remembered what happened when someone tried to end it. And somewhere beyond the edge of mapped space, something ancient watched Earth quietly.